absolutely.
Kerry's not going to be able
Mhm.
to go. Either way.
Okay.
I would
Either
say-
way,
I'm sure he'd vote yes.
okay, and Terry Ackerman vote aye. So thank you so much, Elise. We really, really appreciate it. And now we have to elect a clerk. And
I would just like to say thanks for everybody's confidence in me. I consider this to be an administrative role, so I'm going to rely on all of you to really do the thinking on this committee. So I'd like to entertain nominations for clerk. Terry has been clerk in the past, and I'll just weigh in with my point of view, which is that I think it would be more appropriate for a member who is not on the select board to be clerk. So I wonder if anyone would volunteer to be clerk, or if we should nominate someone. Anyone want to volunteer?
and I'll just say I agree with Elise. If someone else would volunteer, there's been a couple times it's been a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
So it would be smoother if someone else was clerk.
So Cynthia, are you willing to be clerk, or would that overtax you these days?
I've got a lot on my plate, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the only thing I'll say about being clerk under these circumstances is that the meeting is being recorded. That is correct, right?
It is being recorded.
So I could even make my minutes post-meeting.
Yes, that's true.
So
And we can provide support for that, Cynthia. And you know, you're a school committee member and get a lot. I don't think it would be appropriate for Lori or Jared and I to be clerk.
denominate them.
No, I agree with that. And we could nominate Carl Packard, but since he's not here, but
normally the no-show gets clerk. That's
but as a new member, I think that would be a technical foul, really, you know. So.
Sure, I would accept the honor of the nomination of the clerk with the provision that I might need a little assistance.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
this meeting is recorded. It makes it a much.
Okay.
So moved.
Thank you very much. We'll all chip in and help you with this.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask if we'll do a roll call for, I guess we have a second. Do we have a second? We have a
Second.
Terry seconds it. All right, so I'll do a roll call. I'm sorry, I'm not in alphabetical order necessarily. Terry Ackerman.
Aye.
Hugh Lauer.
Aye.
Laurie Hunter.
Aye.
Stephen Crane.
Aye.
Cynthia Rainey.
Aye.
Aye. Elise Woodward. Aye. Carl Packard's not with us yet. So, and Jared, are you with us? No. All right. So
He's on the phone. He must be fixing something. for
okay.
me.
So that's 6 votes in favor and none opposed. So terrific. Thank you, Cynthia. So first on our agenda is to approve the minutes of March 2nd, and they were in the with the agenda for this meeting. Are there any additional modifications to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve them as amended? You can see the track changes in the draft that was circulated.
So
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Do we need to do a roll call? I guess we do. Terry, in favor of approving the minutes of March 2nd?
Yes.
Hugh?
Yes.
Laurie?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Cynthia?
aye.
Elise? Yes. Terrific. All right, again, so they're approved and
I have a question.
yep.
I had never met Parashar. Is he a member of the committee?
Parashar is the new liaison to the Finance Committee. remember Dee Ortner was the liaison
I
last year,
remember.
and
Okay,
so
thank you for
that
reminding.
has changed. And so I apologize, Hugh, thank you for putting me back on track. Parashar, we gave you an opportunity to say hello to us, but we were not courteous in introducing ourselves to you, to say hello to you and welcome.
Well,
So
thank you. I appreciate that.
I'd like to run
Terry's-
through the committee and let everyone introduce themselves, and then so I'll start. I'm Elise Woodward, recently appointed chair of this committee. We're very happy to have you and appreciate the FinCom's attention to our work.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Terry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Terry Ackerman. I'm on the select board. One of the big things I've been trying to work on is capital planning. So I appreciate everybody putting time into this committee. And I think we will be moving quickly and finishing our task soon.
Hugh.
I'm Hugh Lauer. I've been in Concord for 30 some odd years, I guess. And I spend my time on the Public Works Commission and the Finance Committee and the Municipal Light Board and MBTA Advisory Board.
And honored citizen. Yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just, yeah. Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Rainey, currently a member of the Concord School Committee and the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee. Was former president of League of Women Voters of Concord and Carlisle, and I was a member of the Board of Assessors for 6 years.
Okay. Laurie Hunter.
Hello, we've met because I visit for FinCom fairly often. So Laurie Hunter, superintendent.
Great. Stephen.
Similarly, Parashar and I are familiar with each other. Stephen Crane, town manager.
Jared, I see that you've joined us. Welcome.
Yes, sorry about that. We've met before as well. Good to see you, Director of Finance and Operations.
Terrific.
And I don't think I've met you, Elise, so pleasure to meet you as well.
Well, nice to meet you. I feel like maybe we cross paths sometime in the fall, but anyway, happy to see you today and look forward to having your participation on this task force. Our new member, Carl Packard, I don't believe he's joined us yet, so I'm still hopeful that he will, but if not, we'll make introductions to him the next time around. So, all right, so I'd like to take a minute and just call everyone's attention to the committee charge. This is just a way of reminding ourselves what we're doing here, and I'd like to know if anyone has any questions or comments about the charge. All right, so in section C, in the last sentence, the charge asks this task force to present recommendations to the select board no later than March 1st, 2020. So clearly that date has come and gone. And Terry tells me that the select board did change the date. I don't actually know if the charge was formally amended, but my understanding is that the this date of March 1st, 2020 has been changed to June 30th, 2021. Is that correct, Terry?
Yes, and the question is whether we need to take another vote to change the charge, because the vote, I believe the vote we took was to extend everyone's terms,
Okay.
extend the committee. So technically we may need to take another vote to change the charge. I'll look into that.
So I'd like to suggest that this committee request a modification of the charge from the select board
Okay.
to substitute June 30th, 2021 for March 1st, 2020 at the end of section 3. Does anyone object to making that request? Okay. So we will do that, and I'll be happy to draft a brief request, Terry, and forward it to you.
Didn't we do that? I thought the board already extended the time, Terry.
Right, we did take a vote. I don't remember the wording of the vote. The wording was either, I don't think the wording was to amend the charge. But if it was, then we don't need to do it again.
True.
I
So
think that, yeah, I mean, Jeremy, Jeremy, we can look it up and confirm, but I'm 90% certain that we, the board voted to extend the deadline to the 30th, which would have the net effect of changing the charge.
Okay, great.
I have it in the back of my head that happened. I would just have to look it up to confirm.
Right.
I think the board took that action.
it definitely happened. The only question is whether the wording was exactly right to cover the charge. That's the least question is.
So this is a housekeeping matter from my perspective, and so we'll follow up on that and just be sure that if we need to make a request, we will do that. So with your agenda packet, you also received a sheet called, it starts out feedback from task force members. So that list of 6 items are points of view of the members who collected when we paused our work in March. So I'm going to just march through those issues just to remind us of what we were thinking about in March. I guess an observation was that it was difficult to find a meeting time, a consistent meeting time that worked for everyone. And so my question to the committee today, the task force today is this meeting time on a Wednesday afternoon from 3 to 4:30 a good time? Can we move forward imagining that we would meet on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock? Not every Wednesday, but when we meet, it would be a Wednesday.
So I'll say that the Economic Vitality Committee has now scheduled every other Wednesday meetings, which I generally attend those meetings. In fact, there's one at 4 o'clock today. And so Wednesday at 4 or Wednesday at 3 would work for me. I think I would just suggest that we maybe put it in the intermediate week from the EVC.
Okay, on alternate weeks, okay.
Yeah.
And Laurie Hunter, what about a Wednesday time?
It's a little hard to be sure because we're on day 5.
Yes.
But Wednesday, all of the kids are home and leave at 12:30. We don't have any kids in the afternoon. So the best chance of it being a good afternoon is Wednesday. So I think that's probably something to try for sure. Jared might have childcare pieces to manage.
I can make it work because I can, with Zoom, I can be in the car and listen and participate.
All right.
I think that's probably something for sure.
Okay, so does anyone else have a difficulty with a Wednesday afternoon in the 3 o'clock range?
I like,
The time,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Hugh?
would you repeat the times?
The time will be 3 o'clock, and we will publish a schedule, but 3 p.m. on Wednesdays, and we will confirm exactly which Wednesdays those will be.
Okay. Thank you.
Terry?
I would just like to ask, 3 o'clock is fine with me, but it sounds like several people might prefer if we start at 2:30. It might be easier for Jared and for Stephen with the economic vitality. Is 2:30 better or is 3 o'clock better?
Cynthia, what were you going to say about
3
that?
o'clock. I am in the same boat as Lori, but still I have work to do. So we have no students in the school, so any other day would be problematic. So
Okay.
I could do 3, but earlier is not preferred for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
Terry, I think if we do 3, like I'm looking at my calendar, if our next meeting was, say, I do have a commitment next Wednesday afternoon, but if our next meeting was, say, October 7th at 3 o'clock, and then we started off on either a monthly or every other weekly schedule based on that date, I know that would work. That wouldn't conflict with the Economic Vitality Committee.
Okay,
At least from my perspective, 3 o'clock Wednesdays is fine. I just can't guarantee that I can be on for all of them. So the sooner we can get the schedule published, the sooner I can block off my work calendar.
all
So
right.
other meetings pop up.
Thank you. Very pragmatic suggestion. We'll try to do that during this meeting, perhaps. Okay, and so we will need to confirm that with Carrie and with Carl. All right.
Yeah, I don't know, just not to speak on Kerry's behalf, but I can tell you that it was today that was an issue. I don't know that Wednesdays at 3 o'clock are structurally an issue. I just know she had another commitment today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I guess just glancing through my calendar, it depends. I have a couple Wednesday commitments, so it'll just be trying to work around those.
Okay, well, when we get around to talking about the proposed schedule, maybe we'll try to firm up some of the dates and, send them around so people could make suggestions of adjustments if necessary. So I think our intention is to take a little bit of time this meeting and perhaps the next meeting to remind ourselves of the thinking we did before March, and then to frame our intentions to go to a public hearing or public forum to collect public input on this. We were just about to do that in March. And so that I think should be our first order of business after we feel that we're up to speed on that. And because we have a fair amount of experience now with Zoom over the last several months, and with public meetings in Zoom, maybe we will be better prepared to collect input remotely, electronically. So that will be good. And then following the public meeting, we intended to analyze the data and the comments that we received from the public, and then to make final or further decisions, and then develop a report and recommendation for the select board. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Before we go to the PowerPoint, perhaps we should look at the schedule. So does everyone have a copy of a proposed schedule?
I'm not sure I do.
Okay, well, conceptually, the schedule that was circulated, and it doesn't have that much detailed information in it, but it was conceptually a schedule to meet every 2 weeks before a public hearing. And we would need to, I would propose that we need to set a date for a public hearing rather soon and get it on the calendar. So the proposed schedule that was circulated postulated a date of October 28th for the public hearing. And then it presumed that the committee, the task force, would meet in November, once in November, twice in December, and twice in January to develop the report and recommendations and make any any decisions. So that is the gist of the schedule. So we'll circulate it again with the next meeting being October 7th instead of September 30th as the proposed schedule, and every other week after that until a date of a public hearing. And perhaps Jeremy will help me identify a possible date for a public hearing that we could then collectively review and decide if that would work for any of the members of this task force. Also circulated with the agenda was a draft of a report to a select board. And we had looked at an iteration of this in February, perhaps. So at some point we'll want to go back to this and make modifications to it to formulate the outline for our report and recommendations. So,
Point of order, Elise,
yes.
if there's anything that you think would help to do screen sharing, like the PowerPoint or the schedule or anything that you're about to do.
So I think we should go to the PowerPoint, but I'd like to just talk first about the decisions that were made before March, and then remind the committee of decisions that we had identified to be made after the public hearing, and see if there are other decisions to be made, to be added to that list. And then I'd like to do a screen share, and we can figure out what the details for that are, to actually look together at the PowerPoint. So that way we would perhaps be up to speed on what we had been thinking. So in December, on December 10th, the task force noted that a capital planning process exists, and it's used every year for tier 1 and tier 2 projects, and it's also used for tier 3 projects once they're approved. And we agreed in December that the process needs to be transparent and clear to voters, with a description and reasoning for the capital planning decisions that are proposed each year. In January, we had agreement that fiscal sustainability should be referred to and utilized in our recommendations based on definitions that were put forth in the Envision Concord Long Range Plan and the Finance Committee. We agreed that the threshold of $1 million in 2020 would be the threshold for good question.
Very large.
Very large. But actually, then in February, our definition of a very large project was a project exceeding $5 million, or any project that has 2 or more phases totaling $5 million.
Is the $1 million threshold for fiscal sustainability?
Yeah, I don't actually know. We've got to look into that, or consider again if what we think about that. Relative to establishing a permanent capital planning committee, we discussed that. We discussed pros and cons of that, and elected not to make a decision or recommendation about that until after a public hearing, when we could collect public input. And we also noted that a process for prioritizing and sequencing tier 3 projects is needed. So any comments or anything to be added to that list of decisions?
Yes, I think that one thing has changed in the first, where did it go? There it is. In the December 10th, I think that the process for tier 2 for the town was maybe recently changed, maybe because of COVID or other reasons, but I know that it was done differently at this town meeting. So that December 10th item is not completely up to date.
So I guess the only thing that was different was where the projects were placed in the warrant and how they were put in the warrant. The capital planning process was exactly the same.
Okay, if I could understand that, I think that's really important. So I think what I hear you saying is that the town manager and the senior management team had the same process they've always had. But as far as the citizens are concerned, the way the information was conveyed in the warrant and voted looked different than it had in the previous years. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I think the only material change is cash capital or capital outlay projects were typically carried in Article 10 with the operating budget, in the operating budget, which led to the encumbrance process. And with an eye towards getting out of the encumbrance process and just having our appropriations directly from town meeting through a capital article that includes both debt and outlay, then those appropriations would stay evergreen until the project was completed. So that was really the structural change. But in terms of, project development, identifying projects, prioritizing, public feedback, identifying funding mechanisms, those really were all the same. It's just capital outlay was pulled from the budget article and put in the capital article.
Right. So I don't want to belabor this because our charge is tier 3. However, some of the ones in tier 2 are over $5 million and they are kind of going into this very large definition. I think this is very key because this is one of the reasons why the capital planning task force was formed, because the public did not understand the process. And so the fact that it's been presented in a different way this year is really interesting. Maybe the public had an easier time understanding it. I think there's some maybe data that we can collect at the public hearing, but I think that the way it's presented to the public is absolutely key.
Okay. Other reflections?
No, I mean, I guess I agree, Terry. I think and now that we have gone through that process, we'll be able to look ahead and articulate in the future how capital plans will be presented, because I think it made sense to do it the way we did it, and it is a change, but it's going to be a recurring change, not a COVID change. That was planned long before we knew what COVID-19 even was.
Mm-hmm. So does this wording, Elise, the decisions made to date, this is not a document that we need to rewrite and then to update it or anything, right?
This was just a document to remind us. What I did was I excerpted paragraphs from minutes of decisions. So when the minutes recorded a decision, I pulled those out so we could review it. And of course, the way capital projects were presented in this town meeting should not have reflected tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, as we may be considering redefining it. Right? So the very large project definition is a definition of this task force at the moment. Okay. Other comments, or shall we have a look at the draft PowerPoint?
The only other comment I'd make in terms of the distinction between the 1 million and 5 million was, I think when we decided that in January, it was $1 million. And then we had a lot of conversation about it to get us to the $5 million threshold. In fact, I distinctly recall Hugh saying, $1 million doesn't get you very much anymore. And that was one of the reasons why we upped it to, and then I think someone made the comment that it should even be 10, and we settled at 5. So that decision tree did grow, I think, in that way. And so the 5 million is where we're at now, but I do remember distinctly how we got from $1 million to 5.
And the phases in that decision of the very large project was designed to capture the important information to the public that some projects have several phases and will be funded in several fiscal years.
Yeah. So the project's going to be 5 or 6 million, but you just say we're only going to do phase 1 now, and it's 2 million, so it's not very large. We want to make sure that we consider the phases from a definitional standpoint.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Good.
Are you saying, Stephen, that if you do it like you just said, that requires separate town meeting votes for the different phases.
Just from a project planning standpoint, is it going to be, when you're planning the project and you're planning phases, if you have some sense that even on the back of the envelope, the sum of 2 or more phases is going to be more than $5 million, then it should be considered a very large project as opposed to looking at it only phase 1 as an independent project.
It seems to me, from a more practical point of view, that how the project is approved at town meeting or otherwise is what's going to define whether it's in phases. You would not want a 2-phase project that'll pass one time. The first half passes at town meeting and the second half doesn't.
Well, I don't want to go backwards on this point, but I would say, Hugh, that it's the project planning and the design and the engine and like the constructability are what drive the phases every bit as much, in most cases more, than town meeting votes. What gets presented at town meeting is usually a reflection of engineering considerations, constructability, public appetite, funding availability, all those things. I mean, I guess said differently, town meeting generally doesn't cleave projects on the floor of town meeting and say phase 1, phase 2. They get presented as phase 1, phase 2, and town meeting votes up or down on that phase.
Oh, this is Parash, or at least if I can, I think this is tied a little bit, from my perspective, to how these projects are actually presented at town meeting. So, again, from the outside, I kind of look at this, and having done long-term planning in other aspects, up front, you probably generally know whether a particular project for its lifetime is going to cost $5 million or not. And from my perspective, if it's going to be $5 million plus, it should fall under tier 3. And then how it gets structured into phases is all dependent on the technical aspects, engineering and everything else. But when it first gets presented to town meeting, to me, it would make sense to present what you know about the most immediate phase. Not only that, but also, by the way, there's 1 or 2 other phases. Here's the approximate estimate. We'll know in future town meetings, whether it's next year or 2 years later. But that way the town has as much information as possible upfront about the total potential cost and can decide whether even to start phase 1 at that step.
Good. Thank you. So I think we're in agreement about this, and it will be important how we describe this and present it in the public forum, to whether we will get valuable input from the public or whether people will be confused. So we'll work on that. Okay, so if we're ready, let's look at the draft PowerPoint that we prepared that we collaborated on in March prior to the public hearing, and see what we think of it today. Now, if I share a screen, can I put up the PowerPoint?
Yes, so there is the bottom, it's a green arrow at the bottom. You should be able to just go ahead and share the PowerPoint.
And what do I do?
It's helpful to put it in slideshow mode, at least to make sure you can advance the slides while you're in screen share mode.
Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, you can see our date was March 18th. All right, so our intention was to introduce the capital planning task force members. So clearly this needs to be updated. We talked a bit about the charge that to develop a process for townwide capital planning to use annually for a 10-year capital plan. And the task force had talked about the pros and cons of 10 years as an accuracy factor. So we may expect to get public comment on that. And the recommendations of our work would be reported to the select board within 6 months. So we might want to change that and say before June of 2021. So we talked a bit of the presentation to the public forum was intended to show more of the purpose. And I would say that, just backing up, some of these bullets describing the purpose came from the charge, some came from the long-range plan, some are from the FinCom. And then we intended to do a short educational piece on capital planning 101. I think we even had an idea of who might do this. And I think this was intended to be Stephen and Carrie.
Yep.
And this is the slide where we described 3 tiers of capital projects.
Could you go back one?
Yes.
Thank
To
you.
this one or the one before?
This one.
Okay.
Stephen, in this one, in your new system, is this slide still completely accurate, or does it need any changes?
No, it's still completely accurate.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone's happy?
Yes. I'm happy. Somehow or other, I didn't have this slide though.
Okay. Well, this PowerPoint is dated March 18th, and there was an earlier one with an earlier March date on it.
I think I had the earlier one.
So we can circulate these again to be sure everyone has the same information. So this slide addressed aspects of a phase project, which we mentioned a moment ago.
I think there's a caveat here. If you have a phase project and the voters approve phase 1 and don't approve phase 2, phase 1 has to have been something useful that could be completed and stand on its own.
Okay, so thank you, Hugh. You've made this point a couple of times. So I think that it is important for us to consider the risk of not approving a subsequent phase and how that could be clearly addressed. And it may be that a project that is approved would be approved in total. And as Parashar suggested, the phasing would be, an implementation detail, but not a funding detail.
Most of the time, I agree with that. Okay. And I think a lot of times when it's not just a phase, when it is a funding detail, that separate phases can stand on their own.
That's the point of the slide is to explain why projects get phased.
I don't think we can do always exactly the way Elise just stated it. Like, I'll give an example of, let's say, White Pond or Giroux, where we didn't know yet what the other phases would be. However, the phase 1 of purchasing or accepting the property was a complete phase in itself. So it could stand on its own, but I don't think we knew yet what the public input was going to be on pavilions, bathrooms, accessibility, and all of that stuff. So we didn't have any specifics to be able to cost out the other phases yet.
Well, like I said, I think the purpose of the slide is to explain, why do projects get phased? And to some extent, this was, I guess the intent was to, the sometimes spoken but often unspoken criticism of, oh, you're just phasing projects to hide costs. We want to explain that there are times when projects need to be phased for a variety of reasons, or it is a better approach to phase them for a variety of reasons, including you can complete work in a single phase, and if phase 2 never happens, you didn't throw the money away, as you suggested, as you noted, like we cover that point, check. And then there are times where you have an accelerated timeline. The White and Giroux are examples of phasing was created kind of on the fly because of the accelerated timeline under the heading of unique opportunity for purchase or donation. And then insufficient resources to complete in a single phase, but still identify as a community need. You may have a road that needs a mile of road that needs to be paved and it needs to be done now, but you can only do a half a mile in each, you can only afford a half a mile in a year. So then you break that up into 2 phases because you can't afford the whole mile, but you don't want to do nothing because you don't have all the money. And then, sometimes you phase things because it's a $3 million project total, but you don't have $3 million in 1 year. So you do $1.5 million and then $1.5 million. So these are the reasons why we go through phasing, not to just be able to avoid debt exclusion votes or something like that.
So Steve, this is Parasha. One other comment that I would provide on this, and it wasn't clear to me, is many times there are sound technical reasons to do projects in phases, right? And I think it may be worth putting that maybe even up front, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of planning and engineering work, et cetera, that might have to get done. And that's what's really driving the scheduling, in addition to some of these others. And that you're not using some of these other reasons, some of which may be subjective as to what's too costly and what's insufficient, as excuses to phase stuff out and kind of skirt rules.
Yeah, so we could possibly on this slide add sub-bullets to the first. Work may be completed in phases, and we might give some examples.
Or must be completed. That's what I'm trying to drive
Must
at.
be completed. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that seems good. Are we okay to move on, or more comments here? Okay, so maybe the big picture and transition was maybe Terry, you were planning to do that. I'm not sure what slide number we're on, but in any event, when we get to these slides about the town, this was going to be the presentation that Stephen and Carrie would give, describing the existing capital planning process.
The slide should then say that. It should say it's the existing process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And it was to be paired with the capital planning, the existing process for the schools. But this looks like, well, let's just advance it a little bit and see if we got everything. Okay, so this is a slide for the school's capital planning process and timeline, which maybe we need spell check on that.
Yep.
I'm going to go back one here. So does this needs assessment, is this a descriptor of the school capital planning process? Or is this the slide that begins to show the conversation that the school and town may have about the needs assessment for the various components in the schools and in the town for clarity of understanding in sequencing projects.
Yeah, most of this is work on the school side that happens internally to us as we go through our needs and prioritize what we're going to bring forward. And I think probably worth noting is these are all pretty small projects that are here generally. So we don't tend to have, short of them in new middle school, don't have much that hits tier 3. And what we do bring forward either goes into, for the CPS schools, becomes part of the town manager's budget. At the high school, we may put out a separate article. It's typically, at least in my 3 years, we haven't really put out CPS capital separately. It's either been within the town managers or not. So, and we tend to I mean, I don't know how much detail we're going to get into, but we tend to phase things so that it fits within the town manager's project. And I know my thing is probably cutting out because it's giving me messages. So I'm sorry for that.
Okay, so these projects, these types of projects that show on this slide are examples of tier 1 and 2 projects on the school side. And so I think we probably need to figure out exactly the best way to describe that. Some of these would be, the CPS would likely be seen in a budget presentation within the town manager's budget, whereas the regional projects would be separated.
At least this is Parasha. When I read the slides, I was scratching my head and I'm wondering whether we should have a similar format and a style, maybe even just a quick side-by-side with some examples of tier 1 and tier 2 for the town and the school, because we talk about it here, but not for the town. And then a similar either side-by-side or sort of similar format for what the town process is and what the school process is, just so that people don't get sort of all confused. And you could sort of, you know, compare the two, if you will. If somebody says, well, how are they similar or not?
Yeah.
That might be helpful. And then maybe then you could have another slide that describes how the school's capital planning projects kind of flow into and how they get presented into the warrants, whether it's part of the town manager warrant or separate.
Yeah, good suggestion. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. And then this is just our timeline, which we're not on at all right now. But yeah, this is our typical timeline.
Okay, a non-COVID timeline.
Yeah, I mean, just for point of reference, we pulled back a lot of some of our capital. The CPS within the town manager's budget was reduced some. Anyway, we did review it after COVID hit and only put forward what we felt we needed.
So, Laurie, I have a question. This looks like a really good outline for your tier 1 items. I guess I'm wondering, let's say 10 years from now or whatever, if you want to, let's say, do a major renovation to Ripley School or whatever, that would possibly be even over $5 million. It wouldn't follow this particular timeline. It'd be a whole different thing, right?
Right. Just like the middle school has been, it would be a totally different process.
So for town and school, maybe we want to say this is the current process for projects that are less than 5 million or for tier 1 or we know we need to like kind of explain that to the public.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It needs to be clearer in the slides.
So just in fairness to everyone, I would just like to point out that this draft PowerPoint is really a draft.
Yeah.
It was put together in a day and a half after the last time we met before the work of this task force was paused. So really, these are unedited slides. So,
And we did it separately, so we've only seen the slides as a whole once, that last meeting. So
right.
your points of consistency are really valid because we didn't build it that way, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity for us as a group to look at them. And
Yeah.
this is great.
Okay, so then we propose to summarize to the public what the task force has done to date. And you see in the last bullet that we're soliciting input from citizens, which is, at this forum. These are the definitions that we talked about briefly earlier. So we would be anticipating that the public would give us feedback on this. This was our draft project evaluation criteria. So we would be anticipating the public would give us feedback on this. And our recommendations, again, to ask for public feedback. And then the next steps.
Can we go back one?
Yeah, we can. So this is, I just want to, just zooming ahead to the very end here. So we're going to go back here. All right. All right, so that's the framework of the presentation. Is this a slide, Tara, you wanted to see?
Right. So the first bullet here, I think that our group needs to spend some time discussing this bullet, because basically what happened before was we ran out of time. It was time for the public hearing. I think we need to back this around a bunch. This is one of our main, this is the elephant in the room that we haven't really thoroughly discussed. And I think we want public input, but I think that we should go with some sort of recommendation to the public. And I think we were getting pretty close. As I recall, we had some kind of an idea about the town manager and superintendent getting together, and I think we need to flesh that out some more, and take that idea to the public for input.
Okay, well, I think that that's a good suggestion. And so, so perhaps we should allow 2 meetings, our October meetings, for finalizing our thinking and recommendation on this.
I'm sorry, I've lost the context here.
Before making a recommendation to the public, or for making a draft recommendation for public input, that Terry's suggestion, I think, was that the task force take some time to actually complete our thinking on a process for prioritizing and sequencing projects, and whether we have the correct project criteria list, and for all of the bullets on this slide, rather than rush to a town forum, to a public forum. So I guess my suggestion is, do we think that 2 meetings, our 2 October meetings, we should focus on this agenda at those meetings?
I would say yes.
I'm a little bit puzzled here as to whether
It's because you're new.
What's that?
It's because you're new.
Yes. Is the public interested in what projects we want to talk about, or are they interested in a process?
Our
If you already
charge,
have a process, we will get a handful of people come in and argue with us about process, but we won't get any farther on the projects. Meanwhile, we have an elephant sitting in the room,
What is that elephant?
middle school.
Well, so
I don't know that that's the
Middle school
elephant.
doesn't fit- it overwhelms everything else we're talking about.
Well, Hugh, our charge asks the task force to focus on, to develop a process for townwide capital planning. So it does not ask us to analyze a particular project. But to your point about the middle school, we could use the middle school as an example. So, because it in fact, it will be a tier 3 project, greater than $5 million project, no matter how many phases it has. So if the task force is agreeable to that, I think we could make our recommendations on process, but be prepared to imagine the middle school as an example of how the process would be, you know, the test drive of the process, if you will.
This is Parashar. I would hesitate to make the middle school an example because we're going through the process now. And I fear that folks may start using that as all sorts of excuses and distractions. I would not propose that. I think that might be bad. I do have a question about the criteria. Actually, if we go back to the previous slide, I was confused about this slide. And so is this an evaluation criteria that we would be expecting both the school and the town manager to use as they're thinking about projects, or when does this criteria get used? It's not used to determine whether it's tier 3 or not, right? Because that's a dollar amount.
So I think this criteria list, we thought about it as a way to sort of formalize the systems thinking about funding, about capital projects, with the notion that every dollar that we collectively spend, we should be looking for gain in more than one place. So to consider the projects, the potential expenses as a system would help us to, would help the public to understand why we were spending the money.
That's helpful, and so at least that's helpful, and I understand it. So if I were in charge of capital planning for Concord, I could certainly use this project as Stephen and Lori and others come to me and say, hey, does your project sort of meet these criteria? And let's either grade them or put qualitative assessment for each one. And then based on, you know, based on what you tell me for each project here, I will then make a recommendation to the town, rank them, and we'll draw a line at number 15 because that's all we can afford. I can see how that criteria, this criteria,
Mm-hmm.
used that way, but it almost requires a person or a body to actually do that. And my question is that what we're ultimately going to include in our recommendations? I know there was some talk of a commission or committee or something that would do something like that, in which case I would find the criteria useful. Otherwise, I was left scratching my head. That's why I was raising the question.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, well, it makes sense to me. I would say, and I'm not sure that I would I don't speak for the task force in this because we haven't discussed it, but it is something that we should discuss. So, but I think that the task force does need to consider where the authority for capital planning exists today. And will it be valuable to add another layer to the authority, such as a standing capital planning committee, or an individual or whatever, some other advisor essentially. And something that we should consider, I think, is whether that is meaningful if in fact that advisor doesn't have any authority to make decisions.
I agree, and if I like the PowerPoint here, so I would make a suggestion is maybe we add a slide before this and pose that question so that we start keeping a list on one document of some of these major questions on which we've got to either deliberate and then make a recommendation or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
I think before this, maybe to your point, do we have a slide that describes, and we almost do because we put together one on the current 1 and 2.
Right.
How are large projects planned today? Who makes the call?
Right.
Right. And to me, it seems, don't take this the wrong way, Lori and Steve, but it's almost independent of each other, and it sort of comes together eventually at town meeting.
Yeah, I mean, Elise, I don't know if I could just,
Please.
I kind of want to really, quite honestly, reel this back in a little bit. Because I think, and for sure, I do appreciate your input, and some of the stuff you're seeing is kind of a fresh set of eyes is good. The only thing I would just suggest to you is we spent a lot of time hashing and debating things out before we put these slides together. So the slides, behind each slide is, hours of discussion and kind of hashing out decision making. And so I just want you to get more of a sense of what some of the background before we start redirecting the presentation as an observer. And I think the town manager and the superintendent prepare capital plans. That has happened here for decades. Ultimately, the authority to approve capital plans rests squarely with town meeting. The question is, do we want a capital planning committee to sort of vet, projects? But really, it's yet another layer, because you have the administration vets them, and the purpose of the criteria was to show people, here's how we do this, because right now there is a capital planning process because the town meeting approves capital projects every single year and they get executed. But what doesn't happen is there isn't a document or a process that's been written that explains how that happens each year. It just happens as kind of an ongoing repetitive thing. And so when I came in new, I said, geez, I know this stuff happens. I know this is how the town departments look at it. And I know the process is really, if town meeting really fully understood how much thought, energy, effort goes into it, and how town staff and school staff really consider the views of town meeting in the preparation process, I think they'd feel a lot more confident in what we do. So why don't we just create a narrative that shows them how we do what we do? Because then the select board reviews things, and then the school committee reviews things, and then they go to town meeting. And so I'm not, in terms of do we need another committee, I'm not 100% sold on that idea. I've worked with capital planning committees, and it's definitely
Let me interrupt, Stephen. I'm sorry. I'm not suggesting we need one. I was just reacting to the words on the page and the placement of that criteria list, because it came in the part where it said work to date, and it talked about draft criteria. So I just read that, right? So if you already have criteria and that slide reflects those criteria, I would just suggest relabel the title and move it early.
So
That's all I was reacting to.
Yeah, I think what it was is that there are criteria that people, there's not a formalized criteria list like that. And that's why it says draft.
I see.
And we wanted this task force one of the goals of the task force was to develop criteria. Now, most of that stuff is in practice evaluation criteria, but not formalized and adopted. So that's why it says draft. But I can tell you that when we think about projects, that's how we think about them. And that's why I said, well, let's just codify that and show that. But because we didn't want to prescribe something that we wanted public input on, we put it as draft.
Well, fair enough. And I think if the decision's already been made about the committee, I do think, and again, I don't want to reinvent what you guys already done. I think just being upfront and putting up a slide that says, hey, we considered this and the following reasons we didn't do it. I think that just might help, or maybe wording this eventually to reflect what you just said, Steve, I think would help. That's all I was trying to understand. That's all. I don't want to rehash. And at the same time, I personally am not sure we need another committee to do stuff. So that's not where I was going.
May I comment?
Yes, you may, Hugh.
I think something like this belongs in the Finance Committee report, the annual Finance Committee report. How we evaluate projects, what the projects are on the table now, what the ones are coming up for decision, and what decisions have to be made so that the public who gets the Finance Committee report every year knows what's coming up and gets a chance to have a look at it on a regular basis. And I don't think that capital, from the public's point of view, capital spending is just an accounting difference between annual spending. You know, they want to know what's going to happen, what people are thinking, and then the people who volunteer to be on the various committees have something, you know, printed and referenced to go by.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also like to comment, I don't think that we have completely, Parashar, you would not know exactly what we've discussed and what we haven't. I think we were having some good discussions about whether we need a committee or we don't. And I don't think we completely finished that discussion. I think we were evolving. I was one of the people who originally wanted a committee, but I was getting persuaded by the other folks, and this group was originally split. So I think we still need more discussion. I think if we don't have a committee, we need some kind of spelled out process. And we haven't really finished figuring out what that process is and how to spell it out.
Okay.
Just to put a period on the end of that sentence, I seem to recall that we specifically said we wanted to get public input before we made a decision on whether or not there was going to be a capital planning committee.
We did.
Correct. And so we may still decide we want to do that. I think the question that I have about that is, why did we decide that? Was it because it was an elephant in the room? My feeling was we ran out of time and we were in a big rush to get this. We had set the public hearing date and we hadn't made that big decision. So we said, let's let the public decide. But maybe now we take the opportunity to discuss it again. And maybe again, we decide we don't know yet, let the public decide. Or maybe we come up with a draft process that we present to the public. I don't know yet which way it's going to go. I just think we need more discussion.
So I will remind everyone that the League of Women Voters sent us a letter, and they had a relatively strong point of view about this. And I think that was one of the reasons that, and their point of view was that there should be a capital planning committee, if I remember correctly. And so I think one of the reasons we deferred the decision was so that we could hear from other citizens as well. But that, even if we defer a decision until after the public, after we solicit public input, that does not prevent or preclude our task force from having more discussion about this. So I'm alert to the time. It's 4:15, and I want.
Actually,
Yeah.
sorry, Elise.
Yeah.
I just got a message from Beth Williams that the Economic Vitality Committee is waiting on an update from me on town meeting.
Okay. So can you give us one more moment?
Sure.
Okay. So I'd like to suggest that before our next meeting, we each take a look at the PowerPoint and consider how we might like to see it reorganized or made more clear or that sort of thing. And that we'll reconvene on October the 7th, which is 3 weeks from today, on a Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and begin to drill down into some of these issues. And if we use the PowerPoint as our framework for discussion, I think that will help us to also prepare for the public forum and the PowerPoint that we may need for that. Is that agreeable?
Mm.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share so I can see you again. Thank you. Stephen, we're going to say goodbye to you and move on to consider if there's any other business we should consider before we take public comment.
Thanks. Good
Thank you
session,
very
guys.
much.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Any other business?
So is there a date, at least by which you'd like us to provide input on the PowerPoint slides back to you?
I would like that to be the Friday before October 7th, which is October 2nd, October 2. End of the day, October 2nd. Is that agreeable?
And what do you want at that time?
I want any suggestions that you have for improving the PowerPoint and the clarity of our message, or any topics for discussion at our next meeting.
Mhm.
More of the same, Hugh. We want to drill down into the concepts we're considering.
You want this feedback by October 2.
October 2,
Yeah, okay.
please.
Elise,
Okay.
do you want us to have a target date now for the public hearing, or do you want to do some drilling down meetings in October and then we'll set the date for the public hearing?
I would like to have Jeremy research, if he's willing, dates in, let's see. I guess dates in early December, in the first 2 weeks of December, for a public forum. Unless this task force says uniquely bad time.
The whole
Sorry,
year-
Elise,
I don't have a good time anymore, so.
I got the
That's how
edge
I
of it.
feel.
What do,
There's no good time.
What'd you say?
Jeremy, could you look at the town calendar and let us know if there are any dates in the first 2 weeks of December? That's the week of November 30th and the week of December 7th.
Yep.
For a town, a public forum. A virtual public forum. in the
Probably by Zoom.
by Zoom in the evening.
Hmm.
Please.
Yes. So actually, I'll coordinate with Chris Carmody in the town manager's office because his Zoom license is the only one with the webinar ability. But yeah, there shouldn't be a problem finding a time, especially with this much advance. We should definitely.
Okay. So if you could have that information to us by October 7th, that would be ideal.
Sure, you got it.
Okay, terrific. All right.
Before October 7th, please. We're meeting on October 7th, right?
Right, and that's when we would decide on a date for the public hearing.
Yeah, so let's have that material like at least on the 5th.
How about on the 2nd, October
Okay, sounds
2nd?
good.
Okay. All right. Only one due date. Okay. So now I'd like to take public comment. Would anyone from the public like to comment on what they've heard today or anything else?
We have anybody?
You don't have anybody?
Nope.
We're a low interest task force. All right. Then I will give the committee members, task force members, a chance for parting shots. So
I
since
just want to thank you, Elise, and thank you, Cynthia, for stepping up. This is really great. Thanks so much.
stepping up and stepping into it, no problem.
Yes.
Okay.
And Elise, I'll raise my hand if you want me to consolidate the comments on the PowerPoint slides. I'm glad to do that. Let me know.
So I'm happy to, I'm happy for you to take a pass at it.
Okay.
The truth is that this PowerPoint is owned by Stephen Crane.
Oh,
We all sent input to him because it was convenient for him to, collect it.
all right. Never
But
mind.
I doubt he has much pride of authorship. So,
I'll tell you what, if you as chair want to ask him whether he wants to consolidate, that's fine, but let him know I've raised my hand and happy to do it. It's up to
I think it would be useful to all of us to have your point of view, just like anybody else may want to take a pass at consolidating it as well. And then we'll decide how we'll actually implement it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Cynthia, any parting shots?
So my only question is I might have missed it, but is there a reason we are delaying the public hearing until December, or is that when we feel we'll be ready? We won't be ready beforehand.
Well, that's a very good question. When I look at the schedule and I see we're going to meet again next on October 7th,
Mhm.
2 weeks after that would be October 21st.
Mhm.
I think we could have, we could meet November 4th, and perhaps the 18th. I suppose we could consider doing the public forum the week of November 16th, the week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I just,
So
I know-
Jeremy, would you also look at that week, the week of November 16th, please, for possible dates for a public forum?
Yes.
Thank you.
And would it be presumptuous to assume that the public forum wouldn't be in the evening, or do we sometimes do them in the daytime?
Yeah, well, that,
Evening. I think we need an evening. We need to encourage a lot of public support. And that's going to be a future topic, as Hugh Lauer brought up. How are we going to entice people to show up about a process issue? Look at attendance today. We're happy we have low attendance, but for that one, we want high attendance. So
all right, so why don't we plan to discuss at our next meeting whether we should have one or two opportunities, an evening and an afternoon, or just an evening, or just an afternoon?
So definitely the 7th, and I'm putting down the 21st and maybe November 4th as potential holds on my.
Yes, yeah, so if everyone would hold October 7th, October 21st, November 4th, and November 18th as meetings, that would be terrific.
Okay.
Elise, will you be sending those 4 dates and the October 2nd due date to the people who aren't here right now?
I will.
Great.
And Cynthia, if you want to send me a draft of minutes or whatever, I'm happy to add to them, or I could send you notes to add to your minutes, or however you'd like to do that.
yeah, would the 2nd be sufficient, or it's probably just a good idea to get them done? So I'll try to get them to you by the end of,
The 2nd would be sufficient,
okay.
assuming, we're going to be, I don't know when we'll post the meeting, a week in advance, I guess.
Mhm.
Okay. Laurie, any parting shots?
No,
Jared?
no.
Nope.
Okay. Hugh, did we
Lauren
get
and
you?
Jared, thank you so much. You guys are overwhelmingly busy.
Yeah, okay. Hugh, anything more?
No parting shots, no.
Okay. Did I miss anybody? Okay, well, I can't thank you all enough for your attention to this issue. And we started it in good shape in the fall and winter, and after our break, it's maybe hard to get our running shoes on, but we will, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you very
you.
much.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.